Hello again. In this video I'm going to go over the politics of the Gilded Age, and I'm going to leave the money supply question out. I'm going to separate that out all, and I'll do a short video on that. This age was really not influenced by politicians. The real movers and shakers were the captains of industries, or the robber barons as they were called by critics. Jay Gould was one of the most influential railroad barons, and he admitted that he had elected the New York legislature with his own money. Perhaps the most important feature is that most politics in this era is local, and it happens at the state or local level. The entire federal government is only 51,000 people in the 1870s, and most of them work at the post office. And there's only 6,000 employees in Washington, D.C. My, how the times have changed. Americans during the Gilded Age were intensely loyal to their political party, and it was a fraternal organization as well. Attending political speeches and gathering was a major form of recreation, and they eagerly read newspaper coverage, the main media of the day, and joined in rallies, picnics, and parades. Boss Tweed was the symbol of the time. He was a larger-than-life political boss, and he dispensed the patronage of the Democratic Party in the New York City region. He's larger than life, and no jail can actually hold him. Party boss was who controlled the patronage, and this went on in many cities in the 19th century. They rewarded their supporters with government appointments or contracts. There was a huge machine in Chicago as well into the 20th century, controlled by the Daley family. Tactics during politicians at the national or local level, Republican candidates would regularly wave the bloody shirt, encouraging veterans to vote like you shot, accusing Democrats of having caused secession and the Civil War. Democrats, the solid South, would always vote Democratic. The old Gulf Coast states, they stood for the same things as they did before the war: limited government, states' rights, and white supremacy. Republicans tended to favor high tariffs to protect manufacturing and industry, but Democrats also supported tariffs if they benefited businesses in their districts. The third parties would arise to bring attention to issues that the two major parties are neglecting: currency inflation, railroad regulation, or legislation to restrict alcohol consumption. More on that in a moment. The Republicans were strongest in the North and West and extremely weak in the South. If you won the Democratic primary, you pretty much won the election. As the party of Lincoln, they could rely upon the votes of African Americans in the South until they were disenfranchised, and a large block of Union veterans of the Civil War organized themselves into the fraternal group called the Grand Army of the Republic. Democrats were more diverse and an unruly coalition of Southern whites, Northern immigrants, Mormon Catholics, Jews, free thinkers, and those repelled by the Protestant Republican party of morality. As one Chicago Democrat explained, "A Republican is a man who wants you to go to church every Sunday. A Democrat says if a man wants to have a glass of beer on Sunday, he can have it." And other issues politically at the national level, if there are going to be any, it is civil service reform. This will be one of the accomplishments at the national level eventually. Rutherford B. Hayes was elected in 1876. The Compromise of 1877 ends Reconstruction in the South, but during his administration he is not successful at any sort of civil service reform or trying to curb the power of the party bosses at the state, local, or national level. And you can see here this cartoon is abandoning reform on the elected candidate of 1880, James Garfield, the Republican of Ohio, will win this election. And eventually the Pendleton Act will reform civil service at the national level, which called on government jobs to be awarded on the basis of merit. You got to take a test to get government jobs instead of party loyalty. And why does this go through? Because Garfield is assassinated by Charles Guiteau, a crazed office seeker. He's shot on July the 2nd, 1881. He's only been in office a short period of time. And yes, I have killed Garfield. He felt that he had done the assassination. Now Arthur is president and I am a stalwart. The stalwart wing, of the Republican Party wanted to see U.S. Grant nominated for a third term, and he almost won, but they could not come together on this, and Garfield was actually a compromise candidate of the Republican Party. He lingered for many days. He was shot in the back and the side, and eventually he died because of inept medical care. Medicine was nowhere near what it will be in the 20th century, in the late 19th century. It was a sensational trial. Guiteau said that God ordered him to kill Garfield. Heck of a defense. Eventually, he is convicted and he was hanged on June the 30th, 1882. Because of this, they will pass civil service reform. Chester Arthur continued the tradition of the vice president succeeding to the presidency because the president's gone, started by John Tyler in 1841, continued by Fillmore after the death of Zach Taylor in 1850, and Arthur helped push through the Pendleton Act, surprisingly because he was from the stalwart wing of the Republican Party. In 1884, the mugwumps will be reformers in the Republican Party that will switch allegiance to the conservative Democrat Grover Cleveland for president, because they didn't like James G. Blaine, who they felt was the tool of the wealthy and the railroad companies. And during this campaign, it comes to pass that Grover Cleveland had fathered an illegitimate child in 1874 while he was in Buffalo, New York. He was the former mayor of Buffalo, then he became governor of New York, and he had a reputation for honesty and integrity. And during the campaign, a Buffalo newspaper published this article saying, and Cleveland never denies this, he had secretly supported this child since its birth. And this campaign was one of the most colorful in 19th century political history. And these were some of the slogans of the two rival parties. "Mama, where's my pie?" Tariff reform will be a big issue. Even though he is a conservative Democrat, he pushes for tariff reform because it is another reason for the deflation of currency. It's making things more expensive for American consumers. Protection at this time, American business has been established. It's not really necessary, and all it's doing is hurting consumers. Europeans and other countries cannot compete. As mentioned, he is a conservative Democrat. Though the people support the government should not support the people. And he vetoed more acts of Congress than any previous president in political history. He wouldn't even help out Texas farmers who needed more seed because the drought had killed their crops. Eventually, the tariff was reformed, and also in order to oversee railroads, the ICC is established. Both of these things were done in 1887, and Cleveland supported it. They had limited power to regulate the railroads, though. In the Munn Act, the Supreme Court said that the railroads could be regulated, and then in Wabash, they will rescind this, because only Congress, the court said, has the power to regulate rail, not states or localities. Also, there will be an attempt to outlaw monopoly with the Sherman Antitrust Act, named for Ohio Senator John Sherman. It's the first attempt to limit the size and power of companies within their markets. But this act will actually be used more against labor unions than against big corporations. John D. Rockefeller was an extremely skillful businessman, and he will invent the holding company to get around the Sherman Antitrust Act. So those are the big three things that were done to try and limit the power of corporations. At the national level, there's civil service reform, there's tariff reform, and the Sherman Antitrust Act is passed in 1890. And that's about it for this particular section.